have the belief that without being your authentic self in life, it's impossible to actually experience deep fulfillment. And I want to explain a little bit of my reasoning behind this. I think this is an incredibly important thing when it comes to experiencing the maximum amount of fulfillment in life. So when you're not being your authentic self, what are you actually acting out of? What's the underlying emotion and energy that's controlling you then? It's going to be a lot of background conditioning that's typically unconscious. It's going to be things like wounds, cultural conditioning from childhood. It's going to be things like emotions that you want to avoid. It's going to be things like tendencies that lead to escaping yourself, tendencies that lead to escaping the present experience. So now it's quite obvious that, okay, if we're kind of stuck in all this conditioning, it's impossible to really experience fulfillment at the levels that are truly possible for you. Right? I hope you understand that. And I also want to mention another point is that we kind of take all this stuff for granted. All this conditioning, all the falsehood, all the ways in which we cover up our authenticity, we take all this for granted. In fact, we confuse that for our authenticity. We actually confuse all that for reality, for just how life is, for just who we are. And I want to start to define authenticity so that you get a bit of an idea of what this really is. So authenticity implies truth. Authenticity implies your genuine and truthful way of being. And when you're inauthentic, you're not acting from truth. You're not acting from being genuine. You're acting from falsehood. And it's exhausting to actually do this because you have to continuously construct this lie. And then you got to feed into this lie over and over and over and over again. You got to create something that's not true, which doesn't even exist. And you got to continuously act it out over and over and over again. Lying is actually very exhausting. The truth is just that which that exists. The truth is just that which that is, to simplify it even further. Lying is when we paint over that which that is, or we just deny it entirely. We divert our attention away from it. We distract from it, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So when we're actually doing that, we have to put energy into these mechanisms, and that itself is exhausting. This is actually a highly uncomfortable way to exist. It's very taxing on your energy. That's why things like truth are effortless in, as I say, in the Taoist sort of philosophy. Right? They talk about, the effortless way, things like this in Buddhism as well. Right? This is what happens when you create yourself to be someone who can hold truth. Life becomes effortless because you're just rolling with what is. You're flowing with life rather than needing to fight against it and concoct all sorts of illusions against it. Life becomes effortless because you've surrendered your ego and all your illusion constructing. I can go into more detail about that, but I'm not going to. So in this video, I want to give you a lot of principles that are going to help you to actually begin to investigate yourself and give you a good idea of your own authenticity. And I want to be very clear with you is that this is an investigation. This is something that's actually going to take time, energy, attention, resources. This isn't something that you're going to get just from watching a YouTube video. The goal of this video is to kind of just paint a good picture in your mind of kind of what's really going on here, and then to kind of put you on that direction of like, how do I discover what's true for myself? You see, I'm really not interested in having you kind of believe me. I'm not interested in you just like absorbing this information mindlessly. I'm interested in having you investigate life for yourself openly and with a sense of curiosity. Because this is what's actually going to lead to a real change. Whereas you just believing what I say, yes, Lucas, tell me more. This isn't really going to do very much at all. So without further ado, let's get into some of these core principles. And the first one is mindfulness and being sensitive or aware. Sensitive here just meaning very aware of your experience. You see, without a way to be mindful, attentive to your experience, without a way to actually become grounded in it, without a way to become attuned to it, to notice the subtle dynamics going on inside of it, I'm going to argue that it's very hard, if not impossible, to really be authentic. I think also another point that goes along with this is my ideas on conditioning earlier, is that when you're acting out of fear and deeply held beliefs and all this kind of stuff, when it's all kind of underneath the surface and you don't have a way to shine the light of awareness on it, it's just going to reinforce itself over and over and over again. So when you're practicing something like meditation, this is allowing you to shine a light on the unconscious, to just simply make the unconscious conscious. And a lot of the unconscious is what's controlling you. 95% of your life is controlled by subconscious or unconscious conditioning. And if we're trying to be more authentic, we're going to have to look into that conditioning and just kind of dismantle and let go of just what's not serving us, what's not true to us, what's holding us back, the patterns that are a disservice to our being. So mindfulness and kind of being aware of your experience, being sensitive to it, really involves attuning and noticing the sort of subtle feelings that are going on in the experience that you're having. Like, where does an action that you're doing come from? If something's always coming from fear, from lack, from scarcity, from just repetition, and you don't even know where this whole thing even came from, odds are it's not very authentic to you. And I promise you'll be able to kind of notice, as you practice this kind of stuff and all these principles, you'll be able to notice what is and isn't authentic to you. You'll be able to notice it just like that. There's a shift that actually happens. So this is about, like I said, noticing the subtle feelings, sensations, emotions, and beliefs that control you. Essentially, we're noticing our actions, and then we're noticing what's underlying them. We're noticing what they're being done out of. A belief that this shouldn't be happening right now, for example, and then you're kind of reactive, or you're restless. I shouldn't be here right now. I should be doing something. Essentially, any kind of thing whatsoever that acts as a disconnecting force, a way to escape the present and escape yourself, this is going to foster inauthenticity, because authenticity requires deep connection to yourself, deep connection to the present. How can you be authentic when you're always trying to escape yourself? How can you essentially express yourself openly, authentically, honestly, truthfully, if you're always repressing yourself and avoiding yourself? These don't go together. So beliefs that kind of keep you stuck in patterns that involve escaping, avoiding, running away, all this kind of stuff is going to hinder your ability to be authentic. The emotions you have that are kind of in the background, and those sensations and all this stuff really goes together, right? Those emotions you have that you don't tune into, watch my video, What Needs Your Attention the Most, all those emotions that, are controlling you, that you don't tune into, you don't feel them, you don't give them your attention, you're not with the sensations of them, this is going to push you away from your authenticity. Because again, you have to be grounded within the self, connected to the present, in order to actually be authentic. So my next point is a healthy body and mind. This involves fueling your body with what it needs. This involves putting into your mind healthy information. If you're giving your body toxic food and information, food that's loaded with heavy metals, food that isn't actually nutritious for you, if you're putting garbage information into your mind and you're numbing it through endless scrolling and entertainment and etc., you can't be authentic because you're too numb. You can't be authentic because all this stuff, again, acts as a disconnecting force. And a deep principle here of authenticity is connection. Connection to yourself. Awareness of yourself. And without that, it's impossible to actually be authentic. Moving on to self-compassion, becoming an inner parent to your inner child. I want to explain this just a little bit, but I have this book right here, actually. You can check out. It's also on my book list, Healing the Child Within by Charles Whitfield. I'd recommend just purchasing it and reading it. It's not a very big book. But essentially, you want to be familiar with inner child wounds because a lot of the conditioning that fosters inauthenticity comes from that. Maybe you didn't get the attention that you needed. Maybe there were crucial times where you just needed connection and you didn't get it. Maybe there was no one around to help you process your sadness, right? And a child doesn't have any capacity to process emotion by themselves, right? Maybe there was just kind of no one around to help you with these kinds of things, and so it had to be repressed as a defensive mechanism, and all this stuff kind of lingers in the background, and you don't even really know that it's happening, and it's just kind of controlling you. And because of that, you don't feel authentic, you don't feel connected to yourself. So being able to be mindful, right? This is going to go hand in hand with being compassionate towards yourself. Again, think in interconnected ways, think in more holistic ways. Your mindfulness is going to go hand in hand with your ability to be compassionate towards yourself. So when you're able to meet these, for example, wounds, feelings, the things that you kind of want to avoid inside yourself and might not like, you can actually meet that with openness, presence, and compassion. You create a deeper sense of interior safety within yourself, which fosters authenticity. Because in order to be authentic, you, like I keep saying, you need to be present and grounded in the moment. You have to be open. You have to feel safe enough to be open and authentic. Right? Keep in mind, just really keep that in mind. You need to feel safe enough to do so. And if all these parts of you are unconsciously not feeling safe, they're going to be acting out of reactivity. They're going to be dishonest. They're not going to be open, transparent, etc. They're going to be more manipulative, reactive, exploitative, acting out of survival mode, overly competitive. You're not going to feel like you have your needs met. And just as a consequence of that, you're not going to be able to be fully authentic. Moving on is radical self-honesty. I like to talk about this idea of self-deception in my videos because the human mind is full of deceptions. It can deceive itself, deny, blame, project, etc. And without having this principle of radical self-honesty, and without taking the problem of self-deception seriously, you're not going to be authentic because it's going to be too easy to just deceive yourself into thinking you're being authentic when you're not. It's easy to kind of just ignore this whole path that I'm laying out in this video by just saying, nope, I'm authentic, and it's a deception, and that's it. Talk yourself right out of this one. So radical self-honesty, right? Noticing self-deception, being able to be your own whistleblower. I like this concept, and I got it from a guy named Robert Augustus Masters in the book, Bringing Your Shadow Out of the Dark. He talks about simply being your own whistleblower, having the capacity to call your own shadow, and being reactive, or maybe there's frustration in the background that I don't want to feel. Maybe there's grief that I don't want to feel. Maybe I feel ungrounded, uncertain, right? And I don't want to feel that. He's got a really good book, Bringing Your Shadow Out of the Dark. I'd highly recommend that one. Right? Really just developing this capacity to call yourself out. And then over time, you fall in love with being truthful and honest. Because to lie is so exhausting. To avoid is so exhausting. To deceive is so exhausting. Moving on is just simply asking yourself powerful questions. This all ties into radical self-honesty, by the way. Asking yourself powerful questions. Was this authentic to me? Does this resonate with me? Is this honest? Is this true to my core values? What are my core values? Right? Learning to just ask yourself questions to just create a sense of reflection. Moving on is also facing the difficult emotions that we want to avoid. This goes in with radical self-honesty as well, because avoidance is this sort of form of lying, deceiving, all this stuff goes together. Lying, deceiving, projecting, manipulating, avoiding. All this stuff kind of just goes together, and it's just like textbook ego. So that's why really bringing your attention to some of these dynamics is really important, because you kind of have to clean up your mind of all this kind of shadow stuff so you can be more open and feel more safe and be more authentic. Because without doing that, again, you're acting out of that survival-based conditioning. So again, this is tricky stuff. It's courageous work, really, and it requires very courageous human to even be able to acknowledge a lot of these things about themselves. So if you're doing this work, congratulations. You're doing the things that most people on the planet spend most of their time avoiding. Right? Not to judge anyone, but just to emphasize that this is just, you're worthy of an applause, really. This is difficult stuff. Moving on is the distinction between natural versus forced. This is a totally new point, by the way, right? And I'll go through all my points once again at the end of the video. But natural involves living in alignment, presence, being grounded, being open, being receptive, being attuned, right? Kind of relaxing and settling into the moment, whereas forced is all about being closed, rigid, dogmatic, imposing, overly dominating. So force isn't actually always bad. There's a time and place for force, actually. Again, we're not trying to make a boogeyman out of the word force here, but generally you'll find in experiences in your life that natural is better. Right? I can bring up some examples when force could be good. Maybe if someone's attacking you and you have to force them, you gotta defend yourself, for example, right? This can be an example of force. But generally in your sort of everyday life, there's not much need for force. And natural, and learning to move with life rather than against it, learning to surrender to it rather than fight against it, is going to lead to deeper authenticity, rather than needing to impose yourself. Right? And this doesn't mean, right, when it's kind of weird, because natural, right, when you're not used to it, doesn't actually feel natural. It feels strange. It feels unnatural because you're so used to force. You're so used to pushing and dominating and imposing your will and maybe even being passive aggressive. Right? These are all some examples of force. But natural can also include just a healthy amount of assertiveness as well. Maybe you're asserting yourself so you can get a need met or set a boundary. But again, kind of just attuning to this shift in your experience of just natural versus force. And really noticing the feeling of both of these. Force is so tense. Force is so urgent. Force needs to be done right now, and there's no other way. Natural, it's almost like we've kind of lost our sense of time. Not that we're incompetent, but that there's a timelessness that occurs now. I think a good example of this is indigenous elders who have a lot of wisdom. There's a sense of timelessness to these kinds of people. Maybe like a Buddhist master, a Zen master as well. A sense of timelessness is involved here. Right? Maybe you read up on some Lao Tzu, and there's no need to hurry. There's no need to rush, no need to force. So I'll let you kind of contemplate that one on your own. Moving on is intrinsic motivation. This exists as opposed to extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation involves creativity, curiosity, purpose, meaning, mastery, freedom, passion. Did I say intrinsic or extrinsic motivation? I hope I said intrinsic. Intrinsic motivation is all those qualities. It all has to do with inside of you. Extrinsic is external. Extrinsic has to do with things like people pleasing and getting validation, doing things just for status, money, sex, awards, recognition, things like this. That's not really authentic to you. Again, there's nothing wrong with that stuff. There's really nothing wrong with validation or money. But the thing is when you're doing and getting all that stuff and it's disconnected from the intrinsic motivation, it's actually not satisfying. You make money in ways that are unsustainable. It's actually just exhausting. If your career is fueled by passion and love and creativity and a connection to the thing you're doing, this is actually a sustainable career. The work you do is sustainable. You're not going to burn yourself out. It's going to be harder to, you still can, but you're not going to burn yourself out as easily as you would if it was just totally extrinsic. It's something that you truly don't like doing, but it just makes money or it just gets you some kind of just external thing. So you want to align your life with intrinsic motivation because this is a natural guidance system inside of you. This is like pointing you towards your natural blueprint, the things that you do out of just curiosity, a sense of openness, a sense of wonder. sense of passion, a sense of creativity. Just attuning to those things, getting clear about those things, and learning to continuously follow your intrinsic motivation, which can be scary because you're kind of reconnecting to your own instincts here. And in a lot of cases growing up, we kind of have to forget about our instincts so that we can kind of conform to what someone tells us we should be doing. Do what the authority figure says, whoever it is, a teacher, parent, etc. Even though your own instincts can be telling you to do something else. There's not enough emphasis in our culture on trusting your instincts, on even connecting to your instincts, on how to do that. Authenticity is very instinctual, meaning that's just very natural. It's just a very organic way of being. And we live in a world that's kind of so disconnecting, so numbing, to the point where we kind of begin to confuse the two. My last point here is just practice. I want you to accept that this is going to take time. I want you to accept that there's going to be a process to this. I want you to accept that this is work, really. I don't want you to kind of take that. I don't want this to kind of be like a grind set sort of mentality, like this is work. But I want this to kind of be seen as something that you need to actually dedicate time, attention, energy, resources to in order to get any kind of results. So I guarantee you, if you practice this information in a sincere way, you're actually going to get noticeable results. And I also want you to recognize that this is self-actualization work, and it ultimately leads to self-transcendence. It leads to deeply connecting and actualizing the self, and then even moving beyond the self, since ultimately we're not a self. Ultimately, there's something deeper here than just being a human being that's going on. We're just consciousness. We're existence itself. Right? So read up on transpersonal psychology, read up on self-transcendence. Go to my book list, check out a bunch of the psychology books and the consciousness and spirituality books if you want to know more about that. But all this stuff is very essential for being authentic. I think really checking out a lot of the books on my book list can deeply help you with this journey as well. Right, so I want you to recognize that this involves the higher reaches of... Sorry about that, my camera decided to turn off. I want you to understand that this involves the higher reaches of human nature. This involves higher levels of consciousness. This involves some pretty sincere and deep personal, psychological, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual development. That's it for this video. If you're interested in working one-to-one with me, you can apply to do so. Link is in the pinned comment. Take it easy.